Well, hey there, and welcome to episode number 8 of Groove, the No Treble podcast, which you can always find at notreble.com. My name is Mitch Joel, and let's get on with the show. So, who are you and what do you do?
Hello, I'm Steve Lawson, and I'm professionally curious. I'm in this context. I'm a musician.
You know what? I think we're going to become BFFs really fast, you and I. Because if you start off with professionally curious, you're right away in my sweet spot, Steve. That's great. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. I'm going to tell you when I first came to know you, and it's going to be an admission of probably me being late to the game, as it were. But somebody had sent me a link of some guy from Birmingham with curly hair playing a cover on bass of Lionel Richie's Hello.
Yes.
And I thought, my first reaction was, okay, it's going to be someone sort of doing the phrasing really high up on the neck and whatever. And then when I watched the video, it really sort of, all I can tell you is the visualization that I remember, and how often you remember things you see on YouTube because we see stuff all day, is that it's almost like I was looking at something through a hole that was about 3 inches wide. And as you played, that hole just like got wider and wider to the point where it felt like I was driving in the countryside, looking outside, like diffused vision as you would drive and try and take in a full landscape. Like, it really was something that I had not experienced as a fan of the instrument and a fan of music, where the music, like the whole thing really opened up to me. And it was really like, as I'm saying, I'm getting chills. Do you sort of know that your music is doing this when you create it?
It's a consistent enough reaction that I'm aware of it. I mean, I know it's one of those sort of artist cliches that you're meant to kind of remain detached from all of this. But you know, when people respond to things in similar ways a number of times, you get to the point where you go, well, okay, well, obviously, this isn't just BS. I'm actually, kind of my intention, which is to connect on a level beyond. Isn't that clever to do that on a bass? That my intention to aim much higher than that. The fact that it successively and consistently connects on that higher level means that I'm doing something right.
So I want to then go back a little bit in time and understand, not when you acknowledge that from the stance of people acknowledging it, saying it in comments, connecting to you, or telling you a story just like I did, which I'm sure, as I know, as a creative person, whether it's a book or an article, when someone says that, it's both, I think for me, because I'm self-deprecating, it's a little bit embarrassing, but it's mostly like you feel very warm and appreciative of it. But take me a bit back in your process when you started realizing, I know that I'm actually creating music that is opening up doors that I don't think I heard before, or that I heard in my head that I'm suddenly able to put down, because a lot of people can't connect that bridge.
Weirdly, I think it was kind of there from the start with the solo project. I mean, I think that my professionally curious thing comes from a perpetual state of restlessness. and that's been there since I was a student. So when I was studying music in the early 90s, I was the guy that was trying to work out chord melody arrangements of Stairway to Heaven while everyone else is trying to play Good Times and Le Freak, and but I always veered away from the kind of the obvious sort of clever things to do on a bass that I spent a short time listening to kind of fusion records, I guess, but the muscularity of them, that sort of very conspicuous competitive side of it, I found I very quickly got tired of, and so I started to explore the emotional content of the instrument. And I think, I can't really overstate the importance of reading about Michael Manring before I ever heard him. I mean, I first heard of him 7 years before I heard him play. It's now really 7 minutes between me hearing of somebody that I'm interested in and actually getting to hear their music. That's the wonder of the web. But it was 7 years. I had 7 years of reading about Michael before I actually got to hear his music. And the way that he described what he was doing, why he was doing it in his process, was so monumentally important to my journey and to what I was aiming for before I heard him. And weirdly, I mean, when I did first hear Thonk, that normally with that kind of build-up, the music itself is a disappointment. And he's in a class of probably maybe 3 or 4 records in my entire life where I heard it and went, okay, that is everything that I wanted it to be and more. And so I think that in him I found a kindred spirit who acted as mentor before we'd ever met. So that having that sense of purpose meant that I was always aiming for that, and the feeling that I was actually beginning to get there happened on my very first solo gig. And that's the thing that still amazes me now, is that when I did that first gig in December 1999, I mean, I'd played solo before that, but it was at trade shows, and I did one really weird thing for somebody's PhD performance for a contemporary dance study. In a site-specific piece in a car park in East London, which I did, which was again an amazing kind of way to be dropped into the world of solo performance. But that wasn't strictly about me playing my music to an audience. The first time I did that was December '99, and right from that start, I was like, okay, I'm onto something here. That the process, the whole way that the affordances of looping, the fact that looping technology made certain things possible that there weren't many people were exploring in the way that I wanted to hear it. That I was listening to other people's music and going, okay, I like what they're doing. I want to do this with that idea. And so that sense of, again, that restlessness, that curiosity, it was there right from the start with the solo project.
I find it amazing to hear you say that, and I'm going to try and tell you why, and then you can riff on it because I'm not sure. But when I came back to my love of this instrument, and I tell people really candidly, I know how to play bass. I'm not a bass player. I just don't consider myself, like, I think I know the dynamics, but I'm not a bass player. I know how to play this instrument. I love the music that it creates, and I'm way more a fan of the music than I am self-acknowledged as a player. Just it's a hobby to me. When I came to Mannering, it was also a little bit late, only because of the gap between when I was really trying to become a bass player and decided I want to just know how to play bass, and sort of moved against my regular life. And when I first heard Mannering, my reaction was, I believe there's going to be a succession of bass players it's sort of like I call it in my brain, it was like the post-Mannering bassist. And the reason I said this is because, I don't have a passion for extreme sports, but it's like one of those things where, like, once the first BMX guy can do that first back loop, suddenly everybody can. And then it's about who can do more with it. And I really looked at Mannering as one of the first guys to do that sort of backflip, and now everyone's going to be able to take it and run with it. And obviously, when I hear your music and see what you're about, I feel that. But being a guy who was in the music industry for close to 20 years too, it's very rare that you would meet a musician almost honest enough to say that it was a contemporary that you sort of, looked at and then figured out your own path. And I think we have seen a succession of bass players who flow into that sort of post-Mannering bassist thing. And I don't know, I'm just sort of taken by the fact that you're really honest about that.
I mean, I always found, even before I was having these conversations back in my teens, I would find artists and bands that claimed to have no influence. It was such a fatuous
bullshit.
It was just obviously such nonsense to try and claim that your music came from nowhere, especially as most of the time it was bloody obvious where it came from. And I think one of the interesting things I find is that a lot of my influences aren't obvious in what I do because I'm a bass player. So while Michael was conceptually a huge influence, musically, in terms of the actual kind of, harmonic, melodic, and sonic content of what I do, he wasn't that big an influence. I mean, I think that the EBO was is a big thing, but I never pursued alter tunings. I never got into the hip shot thing, and technically he's so far beyond anything that I can even conceive of. I mean, it's funny that I've played live with him more than almost any other musician, because I'm again, my restlessness manifests itself in me doing lots of different projects. But Michael and I have played together consistently for about 15 years. But it still amazes me every time I step on stage with him, and I think, how does he do that? Everybody else I've played with, I can work it out. There's a point at which you go, that's what they're doing. That's what she's up to.
It's so interesting.
And with Michael, I don't get that. And then he'll suddenly pull out some new thing, and I'll be like, oh, whoa, back up a minute. What was that? Where did that come from? And so I mean, there is a level of that. But in terms of so from him, I got this sense that there was a new world possible with the bass.
It's
But
amazing.
in terms of what the music itself, the kind of the actual musical context, content, almost all of my influences were singer-songwriters, because I got into the storytelling aspect of it. And again, I think this is something that Michael always has done really, really well, is to tell, and he's got progressively better at, is telling stories with his music. And so my huge problem with most of what was happening, I mean, because I guess I started experimenting with bass as a solo instrument in the late 80s, early 90s. And most of the music around that time, the problem with it was that it felt like there were a series of complete statements being made about the world through the music. And if you were to name it based on what it sounded like, all the tracks would be called, "Hey, look at me, check me out, look what I can do." And that was never an intention that I wanted to communicate through music. Because the stuff that I was listening to outside of that was Joni Mitchell and Paul Simon and Bruce Cockburn and Jonathan Brooke and the Blue Nile and Talk Talk, and people who were broken people asking questions about the world. People who were progressively trying to understand who they were in the grand scheme of things through their music. That their music was a tool through which to try and engage with and understand what it was to be human. And there was so little of that happening in the bass world. There was just this clever sort of almost clowning going on. And it was mainly a collection. I mean, at that time, it was a collection of white men competing to play the cleverest thing on a bass. And it was like, wow, that's not what I'm about and not what I want to do. And so taking that storytelling aspect, taking the inspiration of someone like John Martin, who was a completely, messed up human being, and whose music was, rather than being a way of him trying to cover up his screwed upness, it was a way of him trying to explore a better way of being, a better way of being human. And I don't think, I don't think he ever got there. I think he was a mess all of his life. But his music was always, there was always this sense that it was the other side of who he could be, and that much more lofty aim. I mean, it's one that when you get to talk about it, this is such a privilege to get to have this conversation with somebody who understands this stuff. Because when you talk about like this in the context of an interview where people do want to know what strings you use and why you chose a particular pedal, you sound like a pretentious dick, and it's people are like, what is all this? What do you mean you're trying to be Joni Mitchell? And you go, but outside of that, it's pointless. I mean, it really does. It would feel so futile to be getting into to be playing, the bass Olympics. That's just never been a thing that appealed.
I'm fascinated with what you just said, because if we frame it by the late 80s, early 90s, and you and I are very, very close in age, actually, the references you talked about, and I was going to say with the exception of Talk Talk, but that's not true, because Talk Talk were really active from 81 to like 90, 91 or something like that. Every reference you're talking about wasn't really in their heyday even at that time. They had already, I don't want to say peaked, but they had already had their popularity in another decade, almost another generation. So it's strange to me because we're of similar age. Like, I got into the music industry same time that you started getting really into bass. And I'm a victim of that. I'm like Motley Crue, Metallica. I'm like Nirvana. I'm like, between hair metal and Seattle, and then you sort of tailor back and go into classic rock, or I discovered Pat Metheny, Jacko, man.
Yeah.
So I'm sort of fascinated with the fact that you're like, oh, this is when I started, and I'm a reflection of when I started. But the truth is, the influences by which you're saying aren't from that time.
Well, I mean, I suppose this is because there was an awful lot of music that I was listening to at the time that wasn't influencing me at all. I mean, I was really into house music and really into hardcore and into thrash. I was a huge Anthrax fan.
We're going to talk about that.
And the extreme metal thing. I mean, that kind of that disappeared for about 15 years, and I got really back into it.
It comes back. Yeah, I was going to say same journey.
Comes back in a big, big way. But back then, I mean, I was listening to Napalm Death and Extreme Noise Terror, and the sort of the really, and I think the thing with that kind of music was that it was the end of metal that was about it being visceral rather than about it being showy. The point at which it actually became frightening. I got obsessed for a while with reading about, but not listening to, the kind of the crazy Scandinavian black metal church burning crowd. The lunatics. because
Me too.
because I in a way I wanted them to mean it. I was kind of I wanted there to be people whose commitment to their art and their ideology was that frightening. I mean, on a on a much wider political level, it was horrible. The idea that people were actually, there were fascists and Nazis making records inspired by that. But there was something about that total commitment to what they were doing that was lacking in an awful lot of art. And so I just got obsessed with reading about them, even though I couldn't listen to the music at the time at all.
So I mean, look, there's the pictures of you that, if you sort of Google you and you want to learn more about what I see, the Cannibal Corpse, and I guess the sort of natural reaction, being a metal guy myself, which is part of my life too, is it's cute to wear a Cannibal Corpse shirt, and then you sort of dig in and have an understanding that you really like the genre, you understood the genre, and when I listen to your music, I completely hear that, and for me, even as the music evolved into bands like Nail Bomb, and again more of those sort of extreme Entombed, Wolverine Blues, like there were so many albums that I thought, I can't believe people think this is noise, like like to me it was such a landscape.
It's amazing that you picked up on Wolverine Blues, because that was a landmark record for me. I was introduced to it not that long ago by a banjo player from Seattle called Danny Barnes, who had sent me a message going, "Dude, you need to hear this." Danny and I connected over. He wrote possibly the greatest music economy blog post that I've ever seen. It just headed "How to Make a Living Playing Music." Google it. It's astonishing, and I kept sharing it around, and we connected via Twitter, and eventually met up in Cincinnati. But from off the back of this, and it turned out that he was already my favourite banjo player, because he played on The Willies by Bill Frisell. Which is an astonishing record, and so I didn't know who he was, but I'd already was in love with his playing. But then he would start sending me metal recommendations, and one of them was Wolverine Blues. And again, it's that swagger that it has to it, that funk that there is to it. And Cannibal Corpse have this as well. That Paul Markovitz, the Cannibal Corpse drummer, has this incredible backbeat that he plays when they go to that sort of mid-tempo chugging thing. It's almost like hip hop. I mean, there's just this kind of swagger to it that I absolutely love. But again, for me, it's that viscerality, that commitment to music that has to connect on a physical level, on an intuitive level. It can't be an intellectual pursuit. You have to feel it. You have to experience it. You have to be inside it. Even with that sort of suspension of disbelief that allows you to hear, 5 really nice guys singing about zombies killing each other.
But I want to go in a direction that it may be a bit of a U-turn, but I think it's going to get us where I need to go, which is what it's about. So you're talking about music and the delivery of it, and even if we go into the electronic side and the pure bass roll, that does have a muscularity. And you had said earlier that you, as a musician trying to explore the bass, we're trying to avoid the muscularity, whether it's Led Zeppelin or whatever, and moving into this idea of chord progressions. And when I hear that, trying to elevate it away from playing it into more of the music creative realms, I always think, well, here we have somebody who's trying to make the instrument do more. So this is an instrument historically, primarily, and it is a new instrument, as people like Manring and Billy Sheehan and all other people talked about, that is still fairly new, this electric bass thing. And as the technology comes in, it evolves as well. And I think a lot of the perspective that outsiders, and I do sometimes consider myself even an outsider, would bring is, oh, you're trying to make this 4-string be like a 6-string. You're trying to make this instrument not sound like a quote-unquote bass, but more like a guitar, and whatever it might be. And I'm always intrigued, because I'll speak to people like you, and it's clear that the rhythmic part of it is core, but it's also clear that you do not want to have anything to do with that in terms of what the instrument can be. Is that a crazy thing to say?
No, that's a really astute observation, because I mean, when people say that to me, they go, "Why don't you just play guitar?" I go, "Well, it's not a mistake that I play bass. I was drawn to the instrument. I have a love for its tradition, its history, but I definitely make a very, very clear, miles apart distinction between the instrument and its potential, which is only defined by its physics, and that tradition, which brings with it a whole load of baggage. So when I'm playing a wedding gig, I don't show up with an ebow and a ton of
A
reverb and
stool.
go. So yeah. Although I do charge more if people want me to stand up.
Right,
That's
fair.
it. But I show up with an amp and a 4-string bass and a commitment to be funky and to play chic tunes as though I've spent my entire life devoted to Bernard Edwards, and to play Earth, Wind and Fire tunes like I've been in a tribute band for 20 years. And, and I want to do that stuff well. And if I'm playing, Crazy in Love by Beyonce, I want to play those 3 notes as though they matter and in a way that makes people dance. I don't want to get into it and go, oh, there's only 3 notes in this, therefore it's not valid. That's just part of my integrity as a musician. And there was a very interesting thing that was said to me when I first started playing solo. There were a number of people who were deeply encouraging and important on that journey. And one of them was Mo Foster, who's a British session player and solo player who played with Jeff Beck and Howard Jones. And we played on some of my favorite records and was deeply encouraging. But he did say, be careful because the solo playing might ruin your normal bass playing. Don't let it distract you from what it is that you do from the job. And what was interesting was that the opposite happened, was that actually that through the process of learning how to layer things and to structure solo compositions through looping, I gained a much stronger appreciation for really simple parts and for being that simple part within a much bigger structure. So rather than playing in a wedding band and playing Papa Was a Rolling Stone, where you've got 9 minutes of the same 5 notes, and instead of listening to that and going, but I want a solo, I want to do the fills, it was no, I love being the bedrock on which everything else about this song is built. And that came from looping. That came from playing a simple part and going, the reason this is simple is because it needs to be simple, not because it's limited by the technology.
But can you do that in your own music? And what I mean by that is, so there's, and we'll get into a bit of this sort of technology and how you use looping to build that. But in your brain, are you like, sometimes that's a song, you're like, no, that's the foundation, and I have to add all the tapestry on top. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm constantly fighting against that. I'm constantly fighting against that.
Why against?
Because time after time, the simplest version is the best. That again, it's the witness of history is that every time I take things out, it improves. The other truism in that same space is that my mistakes are always better than what I intended.
That's like what is it, Mark Twain, who said, I would have written smaller, but I didn't have enough time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. No, and I experienced that as a writer as well. That I find being concise is such a great aim, and it's one that I struggle with. That writing 10,000 words is much easier than writing 500 words. That I can write forever. I wrote a 50,000 word novel in a month, but when you ask me to get an idea down in 200 or 300 words, and I struggle. And with music, the temptation, especially when I have, as the technology that I use to perform solo increases and my facility with it increases, there is that human will towards complexity and towards exploration. And again, it's my restlessness. It's the fact that I'm a why not person rather than a why. Why wouldn't I try that? And there's a point at which there's a regular point at which I need to come back and make all of that technology and all of that potential subservient to an aesthetic, subservient to an emotional aim, to a purposeful aim for the music, and not make music that allows me to show off how clever all this stuff is. Because I could do that. This is one of the weird things about this, and there's a metaphysical aspect to this, I guess, in that I know that I could make music that was much better suited to that sort of short attention span wow thing online. I know it would be very easy for me to sit down and produce a bunch of short, clever, technically wowing video and audio clips that would connect in that kind of way. And I don't want to do it because I don't want to be subject to the pressure that would put on me to keep pursuing that avenue. I have various friends who've had viral video hits online. And with that comes an expectation they're going to keep doing that the expectation that comes with novelty is actually deeply conservative, that it's one that manifests itself as a will to repeat that formula. And I have to get away from that. And there is a pull towards that kind of, that it's always nice to create an adrenaline spike in someone in your audience. but I do it across a 45-minute arc or an hour-long arc rather than across a 2-minute video that shows me being really clever. And so I have to keep that in balance. I have to keep the environment in which I play controlled to the point where I can do that, and I don't feel that pull towards going ta-da. There being this kind of early reveal of something clever. And this was something that was an unexpressed aim for quite a long time. It was there in the music, but it was a conversation again with Michael Manring, where he said he was amazed. He said I'm amazed that you don't give them anything at the start of the gig. He said I normally start with something that has that brings the energy level up to a certain point, so people kind of have something to hang on to. The bass players have something to sort of fill that need of theirs at the beginning of the show. And he said, but you don't do that at all. He said, you set your own space. I can't remember quite what the wording was, but I hadn't noticed quite how controlling that was, and how much that was an expression of my need to not feel pulled towards just being clever. And I mean, it reached its peak in 2006 when I stopped playing to bass players for a long time. I stopped doing bass events. I stopped playing those kinds of things for quite a while. Other than NAMM, I would still do the bass bash just because I was there and it was fun. But I stopped pursuing bass players as an audience for a long time because I needed to find a different space to feed off. Because particularly with improvising, because a part of my work is about composition, but the large part of it is about improvising. And in that, it's a three-way conversation between me, the audience, and the space that we're in. And if the space that we're in is a music shop and the audience is all bass players, that's 2/3 of the environment pulling me towards being clever and me pulling towards being meaningful. That's kind of unbalanced. And so I need to find a space where I'm being given permission by the audience to pursue something deeper, something more meaningful.
Talk a little bit about those two spaces, this idea of improvising versus composition. There's so many trains of thought, and there's been so much written about this from the artistic perspective. And it's not just about bass solo. This is about words. It's about people who get up on stage and speak, something I do very, very regularly. That improv can be interesting, and improv can be extremely dangerous, and improv can be extremely rewarding. And it is something that we don't know what we're going to get until it's almost done. Composition creates a platform by which there's a familiarity. And in certain genres of art, I think music being one of them, people somewhat need to be guided a bit. I sort of know that tune. I've heard it here. I've heard it before. No one ever said, I can't believe you two played Sunday Bloody Sunday in concert. They're waiting for them to play that because there's a familiarity to it. And I'm not choosing a side at all. I'm just curious, as a creative force, where your desire to move more in improv comes from a little bit.
Well, you've traversed the two very distinct sides of this and highlighted that the artistic impetus is one that's well documented, but right. That audience experience isn't, which is why I'm about to start a PhD in this. That I'm fascinated by the audience experience of improvised music, and particularly this is an amazing conversation because you've hit on exactly the thing that I'm most interested in, which is about that managed expectation and what it is that people relate to in improvised music as the bits that they know, the bits that are knowable. Because within any improvised music context, it's not that it's completely unfamiliar. That if you're not playing compositions, there are recognizably idiomatic elements. There are bits that you go, oh, okay, this is quite funky, or that sounds like hip hop, or that lick reminds me of Pat Metheny, or whatever it is. And so you're drawing on a very, very broad vocabulary. And the context for this is I would describe as pan-idiomatic improvisation. It's a term that I got from David Torn, but it's been kicking around for a while.
Rolls off the tongue.
Yeah, because and it's as distinct from jazz soloing, which is people talk about improvising and immediately people start thinking about jazz, but actually I think that's a very, very specific thing that comes with its own set of expectations. And there's a set of measures that are for around what is good and bad jazz, and you earn the right to play within jazz by knowing the history and knowing that catalogue of work. It's about memorizing licks and structure, and that's not what I'm interested in at all. It's not that I think it's a bad thing. It's just not what I'm focused on. And then the other extreme is non-idiomatic improvising, where it's sort of where it's ideologically it's about playing nothing recognizable at all, and you get that sort of squeaky bonk, kind of completely atonal, arrhythmic exploration of sonics in a very different way. And again, I enjoy immersing myself in that from time to time, but it's not what my music is about. So the audience experience at one of my gigs when I'm improvising, and I'm drawing on all of this different source material, and some of it's idiomatic, and some of it is about the specific vocabulary of certain players or certain bits of music or even quotes. But also with me, it's about texture and sound and people hearing, back to the thing you were saying before about emulating guitar sounds or keyboard sounds or string sounds or whatever, and that each of those things becomes a knowable hook for the audience. And so they get to explore that liminal space between expectation and surprise, where it's not just showing up and going, I have no idea what's going to happen here. Because there are no situations in which that happens. You never walk into a venue and go, well, I don't know if what I'm going to is a business meeting or a UFC fight or a gig or I'm going for dinner. Our lives are structured so that we do turn up with a set of expectations. And much more narrowly within music, we turn up with a set of expectations for what we're going to experience. And so the management of that expectation, for me, is very much about it existing as part of a much longer narrative with my audience. So I'm in conversation with most of the people who listen to our music.
But
hundreds but thousands of them that I get to talk to them about what I'm doing, so that they turn up with an expectation that they're going to hear probably a couple of things that they know, but that it may well go in a totally different direction, and they're okay with that, and that's why they're there.
But you left out a part that I think is so key, which is the fact that if I had turned to you right now and said, Steve, I'm really sorry, we weren't recording, we got to do this again, the conversation we would have would be fundamentally different. We know that. So the artist performance part, we can't even point out, well, he didn't have his coffee, he wasn't feeling it. We know, you and I both know, that there are days when I get up on stage and speak, and though my content is my content and it is more composition than improv, but there's sort of a fine balance in between, there are some days where the words just don't come. I don't know why. It's not that I was off, or there's just some days that are better than others, and it's just the nature of life and performance of whatever it is you're doing. In the improv world, there's that undefined part. So we can talk about the journey between the artist and the audience. We can talk about the journey in the structure of how the song's going to go. But the truth is there's the unknowable, which is some days it's just clicking away and some days not. And the audience might even go, Steve, that was unbelievable. But in your brain, you're going, you know what? If this was 2 days ago when I did that other thing when I was playing in San Francisco, wow. That's the part that I'm always like, it's such a struggle.
No, it's brilliant. And the fact that it's a struggle is what makes it interesting. And it's one that I have to resist because, and it's funny because I will occasionally shut down conversations after a gig with the musicians that I'm playing with who've gone, oh, that's great, we should try that again. And I go, no, don't even go there. Don't even talk about that, because that as an aim is completely different from playing the thing that is right to play in the moment. And it's really brilliant that you draw the parallel with speaking, because I do a lot of public speaking. I do a lot of university lecturing and guest talks at music conferences and talks about the music economy. And again, I never write talks at all. I try and I only accept invitations to talk about things I already know about. I'm not, it's not that I'm a public speaker. It's that I'm a person who is able to convey their ideas in a way that is hopefully compelling on stage. But it's the ideas that I get hired for rather than my oration. And so I turn up with knowing my subject, and I look at the audience and I go, what do these people need to know? And I do the same as a musician. So I turn up with a set, and sometimes I'll turn up and I'll play a series of compositions. Sometimes it is just tunes. Sometimes the tunes, all of them started out as improvisations. All of the recordings are improvised. But I go back and I learn them as start points for live performance pieces. But that sense of some things being aesthetically better, some things meeting my own kind of abstracted criteria for good and bad, when I listen back to them or whatever, that I find that, I mean, that again, this is part of what the PhD will be about, because that audience experience, like you say, it can be completely out of step with my experience. And so in that in that fleeting moment, I mean, this happened to me recently with a group improv, that we did a gig and the audience went absolutely nuts, just loved it. And we came off stage buzzing because the feedback from the audience was great and it felt really good. But when the person whose gig it was listened back to the recording, with a review to putting some of it out, he went, actually, it was terrible. Actually, there was an element to it that just fundamentally didn't work for him. And he listened to it. And now what's going to be interesting is when I get to hear it, whether or not I'm going to hear it and go, I love that chaos. I love that thing that he thinks didn't work. Or whether or not it was a purely live experience. But nothing will take away from the fact that the audience came away from that saying, I mean, some of them saying it was one of the best things they'd ever seen. So,
it's just a strange thing to hear, right? Because it's sort of like you have a band, audience, and let's call it engineer, producer, somewhat divergent on the same performance.
Yeah, but
when isn't it like that, right?
But what was really nice was that the guy came off and actually, and his comment to me was, actually, we need to do more as a duo. And because he saw in the interaction between he and I that there was a connection that we had that was lacking in some of the other, you know, in the broader dynamic. And but I mean, it was funny because I still remember the gig as being, a wholly positive experience. I really enjoyed the music and I really enjoyed what we did. And I think because I exist in a world of improvised music, I bring to it a different set of expectations from somebody who normally plays compositions. So there is, sometimes people will come to me and go, oh, there were some amazing moments in that. And I listen to it and I go, well, I'm not hearing moments. I'm hearing the whole, and I either experienced that whole as a meaningful journey or not, because those moments didn't exist without the build up to them. And so if there's confusion in the build up, then I like that. I like that sense of going from disparity to coalescence. And I can't see the coalesced part without the disparate part. I can't see the clarity without the confusion. They lead one into another, and I love that journey. I love that sense that things unfold in unexpected ways. And so again, this is about that duality between artist intention and audience experience.
I want to move into this area because I think we're right on the edge of it. You mentioned briefly the fact that you do presentations, which I know, and that you have a passion both in written and in oral about what you would call the possible future of the music industry. You mentioned the music economy. You mentioned also Danny Barnes's great blog post, which I sort of, my head went, what? Because I know it. Danny, he sets 3 preconditions in this blog post. And the first one is, if you are a very materialistic person, skip this article. I don't think you are going to like what it says. And I remember those words very, very well, because I come from a personality, and it's me, everyone's different, that I wanted to be successful. And I did equate success with money. I mean, it is one of the benchmarks that I used in my professional life. It's one of the reasons I somewhat left the music industry to pursue a broader work in marketing and advertising, because I felt there was a creative and commercial sort of application for what I wanted for my own life and my definition of success. And it always bothered me that there was this idea that there's so few people who can make a living doing what this is, and forget a living, but actually become affluent doing it. And I'm sort of bucketing all this together because as we're having this conversation, regardless of when it's going to be published, Neil Young comes out and says, I'm removing all of my music from streaming, sound quality, which, I mean, is a very silly argument because there's, 2 letters to say AM would be, it's not like his music was in the best quality back in the AM days, but let's move it away from that. There is this extreme pressure on an industry. And when I left the industry, probably closer to 2000, I felt this technological pressure and the resistance of the industry to do it. And now there's this catch up where it might be too late, streaming as YouTube, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm wondering, as somebody who is playing in a genre with an instrument that struggled even in the best of when the music industry was amazing, it was hard to be a bass player, a solo bass player in a genre of music that wasn't. So here we sit in this world, and you have thoughts on this. And I know it's probably something you could talk about for hours, but in in a more realistic way in terms of this conversation, where are we at, and how flawed are musicians in terms of really understanding what the artist what not the artist but what the consumers are saying?
Okay, there are a couple of aspects to this because it's really interesting. Again, this is the synchronicity of your timeline and mine, and the sort of parallel journeys we went on. Because obviously, my first solo album, came out in 2000,
Yeah.
and because I was already a journalist, I was talking to all of the bass players who were in that world that I was in. I had interviewed a lot of them, and I knew that none of them were making money from recordings. That they were being given an advance to make a record, which was an expensive process, and loads of money.
Never recouping.
No, never recouping that, and spending enormous amounts of money on promo, on ridiculous things like radio tours, like flying all over the States to play live on these provincial rock radio stations with a bass, and spending tens of thousands of dollars on it. That was there was no realistic way of recouping, but that was what people did. They threw money at projects and hoped to recoup some of them. And for the labels, that was a spread bet. They only needed one in every however many to pay off the debt. But they didn't use that to write off the debt of the other artists. They kept those other artists in indentured servitude and kept finding ways of not recouping and of funneling that money elsewhere. So I knew straight away, firsthand, that nobody was making money from recordings, and that the people who were making money were using those recordings in order to get profile, to make money elsewhere. And so some of them were doing incredibly well on tour. Some of them were getting paid very well for session work. Some of them were getting paid well for endorsement work. And so there was a functional broader economy around it. But I kind of liked the idea of making records that had their own integrity. I didn't want to make adverts for another project. I didn't want my recordings to be a way of me getting clinics, or whatever. I wanted them to be their own thing. It was back to this same thing about meaning and integrity. And so I looked into what it cost to press 1,000 CDs. And I went, well, okay, for £1,800, I can press really, really nice, all cardboard, beautifully done, triple gatefold CD sleeves, and that means I need to sell 200 to break even. I think I can do that, and I did. And so for me, I saw the potential of the web rather than seeing it as a threat, because I'd never made any money in the old industry either. That I saw it as opening up an opportunity for me to have a conversation direct with my audience about making things that they valued and telling the story of how they were made, and then them going, yeah, sure, I'll give you $10 for that. And removing all of those steps in the chain. I mean, my music has been stocked. My CDs, when I still bothered making them, were stocked in about 3 or 4 shops worldwide. And I mean, they were stocked in HMV, which was the big chain here for years, and I never got paid for them. So the only high street representation I ever had was one where they took a bunch of CDs, sold them, and never paid me. So I constantly saw that model as broken, as one that required a level of infrastructural support that needed a kind of an unsustainable scale to make it work, a scale that didn't match the kind of music that I was trying to make. I didn't want to be pulled towards making fusion records for a fusion machine that even then wasn't making any money for the artists from the recordings. So I saw that as broken from the start. So for me, the progression through, as technology got better and bandwidth got wider and download speeds got faster, and so the recordings could be higher resolution, that Neil Young's bizarre conversation and Prince's bizarre conversation about the quality of MP3s, I was like, as soon as Bandcamp came along, I was like, great, I can re-upload everything at 24-bit and sell it without it costing any more. I don't have to kind of stick it on some stupid high-def FLAC download store. I can put it all on there and people can download the 24-bit version. And all of a sudden, we're into a world of ubiquitous economics rather than scarce economics. And that split is one that is still so little understood amongst musicians. We have musicians who still talk about downloads as though they have an iterative value per iteration of that music, as though an hour of music is somehow worth the same as a CD, when 1 billion copies of that music can exist at zero marginal cost to me, and that is a fundamentally different set of parameters to explore than one where pressing 1 billion CDs would cost me $1 billion.
But there's two very challenging components here. One is the fact that while we can go streaming fine. We're going to do a Spotify, we're going to do an RDO, whatever is big in your geographic location, and people are going to pay. They'll use free because it's ad supported, or they'll pay $7, $8, $10 for more quality and to have more functionality, whatever it might be. Is one side. The other side is the fact that we also have an engine of convenience. The fact that a lot of the streaming isn't happening within the confines of that; it's happening on YouTube. And the fact that people are just sort of streaming music there. And there's a convenience. I don't think people are proactively saying, I'm stealing this when I listen to it. I think there's just a convenience. They're on YouTube. There's a click for, Steve Lawson playing an hour of music, a video. They're not sort of thinking, is this copyrighted? Is this not copyrighted? Is this uploaded by the artist? Was it not? They're not even really, I don't think, thinking about sound quality. I think the sound quality nerds, the ones who want to have vinyl or whatever it might be, are going to be consumers, and they're going to spend more money to have more quality, but the vast majority are looking for the convenience and ease. And to me, the frustration always lied in the resistance of the artists, and for sure the labels who are just trying to recoup the money, in understanding that you can say, I'm not doing streaming for all these reasons, as Neil Young did, but it doesn't matter because your fans have already decided that they don't really care.
Yeah, I mean, so when I pulled my music off Spotify, and I've just pulled it off Apple Music, I didn't upload it. CD Baby did without asking me because of some box I'd ticked at some point in the past, and I pulled it off both of them. And the argument was not about my revenue share. It was basically a fair trade one. I don't like the opacity of their deal with the majors, whose existence in the world I think is wholly pernicious, and I hope that they cease to exist at some point in the future.
How do you really feel, though? I'm just kidding.
Yeah, no, but I don't. When people get into these conversations about I don't care whether or not the Eagles ever make another penny off their back catalogue. They don't need to. I don't care whether Led Zeppelin can't get paid for people file sharing their back catalogue because they don't need to. These are artworks that have long ago become part of the commons. That socially, functionally within our culture, their value is entirely invented by us. It's not extant within the work. It's a cultural commodity that is about us as a culture investing it with stories and narratives and history. That means that we've built the value within that. And the idea that there are a number of individuals who happen to write the songs in the first place that somehow own the rights to that, I think is absurd. I think that there's a conversation there about the value of intellectual property that is so deeply wedded to 20th century capitalist scarce economic ideals that is about the value in the iteration of the recording of that rather than a conversation about art and its place within culture. That I'm just not interested in having that conversation. I'm just not interested in people going, yes, but how do these people get paid? I don't care. So what I'm interested in is how we support the progressive and ongoing experience of and development of and the infrastructure around art that helps us make sense of now, new art. And that's because that's the weird thing is that's the conversation the majors keep trying to. That's how they keep trying to frame their thing. They keep going, well, if we can't make money, then we can't invest in new artists. And you go, well, yes, you can, because actually Simon Cowell has proved that there's an enormous amount of money to be made from the pop industry still. That a huge amount of the vast majority of the reduction in profit margin within the major label recording thing hasn't gone to file sharing at all. It's gone to other forms of entertainment media. Because if you compare the mid-90s, when music was probably its most dominant, there were no DVD box sets, there was no functional games industry in the way that there is now, that home entertainment didn't exist in the way that it does now. And certainly as late as 2011, the revenue from sales of physical entertainment media was still rising. It's just that music no longer had its dominant place, and it shouldn't have. There was no reason why it should have at that point. That a DVD box set of House or Bones or The West Wing represented a far greater value to the consumer than paying $15 for a CD. that was a gravy train that was ridden for a long time, and that in and of itself it didn't have that value anymore. The value had to be manifest in a different way. And this is where I shifted in my thinking about the value in what I do, which is that actually that what goes on around my music is a transaction based on gratitude, not on the value of an hour of music. So if my audience are grateful to me for making the music and I'm grateful to them for bothering to spend time on it, then we can then have a conversation about the level to which they are able to financially resource what I do. And that has led to some people paying $100 for a single album download of mine, because that's not about them saying this hour of music is worth $100. It's about them saying, I have $100 that I want to invest in you making more music. I want to express my gratitude to you for bothering to go on this journey that you're on, outside of the recording industry structure, outside of the expectations of what a bass player should do. That you're willing to make music that means something different, and I'm in a position to resource that. And I get to have that conversation with my audience, and it happens time and time again. But I'm also able to say to the ones who haven't got any money, or the ones who are just going, I don't know if I like what you do. It's going to take me a while to find out. I can say, great, then you can listen to it for free. And that can happen in a place where the conversation about that is resourced, rather than one where it sits behind a toll booth like Spotify or Apple Music, where there's this corporate entity that owns the conversation. I don't want to hand over the rights to the conversation with my audience to Spotify. I don't want to be in a place where I need to upload content to Apple Music in order for that conversation to happen. I want it to happen in social spaces. And the fact that those are faux public at the moment, there are places like Twitter and Facebook, which look like the commons but are actually private space, in the same way that shopping centres look like public space but aren't. They at the moment, they function as a space in which I can have that conversation with my audience. And so words like piracy and arguments about streaming revenue don't happen in the same way that people don't tend to argue with vendors at farmers markets about the cost of the fruit and veg that they're selling. They tend to have a conversation about how they grow it and whether they enjoy what they do and what it's like touring around selling homemade jewelry at markets.
And they're not just buying. They know that they're buying and supporting.
Exactly. There's an investment there, and there's an emotional investment in it as well. And people know the difference between shopping in Walmart and shopping at a farmer's market. And people don't go, well, I'm going to go to Walmart because the bread is only 20 cents. They know that that's worse. And so they do that on a day-to-day basis because that's how they stay alive. But then at weekends, they go to the farmer's market and they go to the guy who's selling his own bread, and it costs you $4 a loaf. And you go, you know what? I feel the investment in this. I feel the fact that somebody has taken time to make this unique bread, and I get to thank the guy who made it. And this is a distinction we need to make within music between supermarkets and farmers markets. And there's no point in me competing for space in a supermarket. I don't need shelf space in Walmart for my physical product, and I certainly don't need shelf space in Apple Music for my digital product. What I need is to create a space where the conversation about scale and functionality at small scale and sustainability at small scale is one that I can have with the people who care about it. And that's why I started the subscription service. I'm so glad that Bandcamp built the possibility for it. Yeah, because it means that that for a fairly nominal yearly cost, I can make much more music for the people who care about it.
So, and what I'm going to do is leave a link to the Bandcamp subscription platform for the next solo album. You started this in early July, so it's sort of taking shape as well. We'll talk about that. I want to close out on, because we're on this theme of technology, and we've talked about technology in terms of distribution. We've talked about it in terms of consumers and their interaction with it, and we've talked about it in terms of the intersection of how music gets transferred from artist to the customer. Where we didn't talk about it is actually in the music creation. I don't think it's a contentious issue anymore. It used to be, I think, when you and I were growing up, that when you had effects and technology, you were covering something up. You were using it to add. You were sort of taking away from the purity of it. I do believe that there's been a very fast evolution and a recognition and an appreciation on the listener side that technology can be a way to create and enter into new realms, dimensions, tones, and you, as an artist, have completely validated that model. And I guess where I'd love to hear some thoughts on you to close this out is on how you do the balance between musicianship and integration of technology. And I'm asking you this because the most interesting responses I've had in my journey have been from people who, and Michael is one of them, for sure, Michael Mannering is one of them, who says that the technology, Juan Alderete as well, the technology really is music. And I'm very fascinated with this as a guy who's, what's my core? My core is art and technology. So how do you feel about what it is. Is it additive? Is it core to creation? Where does it sit in your spectrum of creativity?
Well, I guess that philosophically, my first point will be to echo that my instrument starts at my fingers and ends at the speakers. I'm not a bass player who processes the sound of the bass. That I am somebody who plays this entire system as an instrument. That there are a set, again, it's back to affordance theory. There are a set of affordances within that. There are a set of physical limitations within it in terms of what I can do. I've chosen not to use any pre-recorded sound sources. I don't use samples. I don't ever, trigger a backing track that I made earlier. Again, I don't think that's a moral choice. It's not that I think there's something unethical about using drum programs or whatever. It's just that I need to be able to respond exactly to what's happening in the room. I need to be able to set tempos and sounds, and I need that sense of possibility, and my audience respond to that sense of possibility that absolutely anything can happen. And even when it becomes, it's manifest as a sort of typical Steve Lawson gig, there's that sense of possibility is still something, is still a key factor within it. So for me, technology is about opening up possibility, not limiting the scope of the performance whilst broadening because if I'm using backing tracks, I can do a much bigger production number. I could go out and do my solo version of the Trans-Siberian Orchestra, where it's all, kind of lights and sequences and craziness and me playing bass in the middle of it all, but it's going to be the same every night. And so I could do spectacle, but I couldn't do possibility. And I'm much more interested in possibility and intimacy than I am in spectacle. And again, I think that there is an emerging sense that those things are important. That spectacle has been the driving impetus of popular music since the 50s. Someone was telling me recently that Little Richard started out literally as a circus sideshow. He would set up at outside circuses to get people's attention. And he would dress like the crazy guy and scream and whoop and hollow and play piano. And that has been the purpose of pop music ever since, has been to get people's attention. I'm much more interested in what happens once you have their attention, which gives me an affordance for nuance and detail and things that I don't have if I'm set up in the corner of a pub trying to get people's attention.
Yeah, go on.
So for me, technology is about expanding that palette, expanding that range of possible subtleties, rather than about just making a bigger spectacle. So I'm constantly looking at new ways of processing my signal chain. I've just introduced, in the last few days, I've introduced the possibility to play electronic drums. That two of my recent collaborations, the series of shows that I did and then released with a multi-instrumentalist from California called Daniel Berkman, showed me the possibility of his electronic setup. I mean, he's the Hendrix of the hand sonic. I mean, he's an astonishing musician who plays mixes acoustic sound. He plays kora and ukulele with wholly digital sound, with playing iPads and the hand sonic, which is an electronic percussion instrument that he's the absolute master of. And so that introduced me to the possibility, but he's so far down that path that I didn't look at it and go, I can do that. And then recently I was working with Divinity, and she and I have a duo project that again is about us both looking at what the affordances of us coming together, what happens when her world and my world collide, what kind of new music can happen. And she plays percussion parts just on the drum pads on an M Audio keyboard, and is amazing. I mean, it's just brilliant. But again, she's not triggering loops. She's playing it live so that it's constantly responding to what we're doing. It's about possibility and subtlety and variation, not about us going, we need to play at this tempo so we can trigger that loop. So from her, I got the sense that I could explore that in my solo work as well. Although it may be that I end up, that once I've done that exploration, I go, you know what, Divinity's better at this than me. I'm going to save that for the duo. Because she's a massive inspiration as an artist, as a thinker, as a collaborator. I feel incredibly lucky to get to work with her, and I'm kind of excited about where that duo is going to go.
I can't think of a better place to end on this idea of possibility versus spectacle, and I hope you will agree, Steve, that we should probably make this part one of a conversation, because I feel like there's so many other areas that I'd like to explore with you. So hopefully you'll agree to come back to Groove.
Oh, God, anytime.
Very soon. Hey, let people know where they can best connect with you, because you're super active.
Yeah, so the website, which has links to everything, is stevelawson.net. Twitter And Facebook and Instagram is all Solo Bass Steve, all one word, 3 S's in the middle. Solo Bass Steve. So come and find me. Come and say hello. Come and chat. I do get such a wide range of responses from, this music has changed the way I see music. This has made me see my bass in a completely different light. Through to, that ain't bass playing. You call yourself a bass player, and I go, no, call it a banjo. Does it sound good? So I find that spectrum really interesting. So please do come and have a chat. Come and have a talk. Have a listen. All of the music is available at music.stevelawson.net to be streamed infinitely for free, and you can choose whether or not investing in that is something that seems meaningful to you. But yeah, it's been a real privilege. Thank you so much, Mitch, this has been amazing. We definitely need to do this again.